Welcome to the Build Wealth Canada podcast, where it's all about becoming debt-free, accelerating your wealth, and taking control of your money. Now, here's your host, Cornell Schreiber.
Hey, it's Cornell and welcome to the Build Wealth Canada show. This interview will be a bit different as I was recently interviewed by financial journalist Ellen Roseman from Canadian MoneySaver Magazine, where she asked me some great questions. And so I thought it would be great to also publish that interview here on the Build Wealth Canada show. In the interview, we cover what lessons for Canadians I have learned after doing close to 200 interviews with financial experts over the past 10 years. My wife and I have also been either fully or semi-retired for the past 8 years, and so Ellen asked me if I have any advice for those that are also planning to retire in their 30s like us, or just retire early in general. And she asks what kind of financial changes or challenges were we surprised by that you should know about to help you with your own journey towards financial independence and early retirement. Ellen has also been teaching investing at the University of Toronto for the past 20 years, so in the interview, she also shares some of her lessons learned over that time. Enjoy the episode, and if you'd like to hear more interviews done by Ellen, you can check them out on the Canadian MoneySaver podcast, which you can find in your favorite podcast player. Thanks for tuning in, and now let's get into the interview.
Welcome, everyone, to the latest MoneySaver podcast. I'm your host, Ellen Roseman, and today I'm pleased we have with us an experienced podcaster, somebody who's been doing it for about 10 years on a monthly basis, and it's called Build Wealth Canada. And his name is Cornell Schreiber. He's what you might call someone who has taken advantage of the FIRE movement because he got out of the paid full-time workforce back when he was 32. And he's got a family and he's got a few other sidelines. And that'd be interesting to talk to him about how he lives his life now that he doesn't have a full-time job in an office, and how he keeps his podcast going, because it takes a lot of guests to keep a podcast going. So welcome to the podcast, Cornell.
Thanks for having me back, Ellen.
So you do the podcast once a month?
Yes.
And how does it rank in terms of the numbers you're getting compared to other podcasts in Canada?
It's from the stats I've seen, it's in the top 1%. So we get about 20,000 unique downloads per podcast. So we're at over 2 million downloads now in Canada, just in totality as well. So from everything I've seen, it's definitely one of the top ones, one of the largest ones in Canada for sure. Especially when we look at podcasts that are Canada specific, because there's a lot of great US podcasts out there with some great information, but I'm sure you and your listeners have ran into this issue too, where you hear a great episode, they share some really good tip or tactic, but then they start talking about like Roth IRAs and, these tools that they have in the US. And then you wonder, well, hold on, does this apply to me as a Canadian? And so now it's this whole thing where you don't know if you can actually trust the information because you're not from that country. So that was the pain point that I had when I first started the show was, this is great info, but I want to know, does this apply to us as well? Can I actually use this legitimately, right? And so, so that's kind of so it's definitely done well, I think, in that regard. And that's been one of the, I think, key success factors for it, was that Canadians can listen to it. They can learn the best practices, both from different financial experts in Canada. They know that it's relevant to them. And what's been really fun, one of my favorite types of interviews is actually interviewing other people that have hit financial independence early as well, because then we get to learn how they did it, what they learned, what worked well for them, what didn't work well, what they would do again, what they would change. And then obviously everyone's situation is a little bit different. There's different ways to get there, but it's nice to be able to hear true success stories. And then you can pick and choose what you think is most relevant to you and apply that to your own life so that you can hit your financial independence a number early. And there's always more to learn, and it's fun to talk to people like that. So I don't see my podcast stopping anytime soon. There's always more to learn, and things keep changing as well, right? Like whether it's the federal budget or some new investing tools or products or things of that nature, it's something you kind of want to keep an eye on, especially when you're FIRE, right? Because you've got at that point quite a bit of money invested.
Yes. Perhaps for our listeners, they might not understand the acronym FIRE, if you could explain that.
Sure. Yeah. So FIRE is Financial Independence, Retire Early. And the gist of the concept is that you essentially have an extremely high savings rate. Like I know when my wife and I did it I'm almost 40 now. I'm turning 40 in July. I was 32 when we hit our number. I mean, at that point we were doing around a 50% savings rate, which is, pretty challenging to do, especially lately with the inflation that we've been seeing recently. But that was kind of the gist of it, is that you have a really high savings rate. You don't spend a lot. You save as much as you can. Typically, you invest it in something like index funds. Like here in Canada, the most common one is ETFs, where you just buy the market as a whole. You're not speculating, nothing at all. You're just focusing on saving as much as you possibly can. And then once you hit your financial independence number, which can be different for different people, but usually 4% is kind of the general guideline that people go to in terms of a safe withdrawal rate, then, okay, you become financially independent. And then now you no longer have to work for money anymore. And so now you can start designing your life the way you want, essentially. The interesting reality, though, it's fun because I've actually gone through that whole thing in practice, not just theory. And what's interesting, just in my own story and also with the many financial independent people I've interviewed over the years, is that literally every single one of them still ends up generating some sort of income down the road. So when people first get turned on fire, they think, oh, this is amazing. I'm going to live on a beach, do nothing, just, watch as much Netflix as I want, not do any sort of productive work, right? Even those books have those the straw, in the drink and the the chair on the beach, right? But then it turns out from my own situation and also from others I've interviewed is that that's pretty fun. That's kind of like the honeymoon phase of hitting your financial independence number. But then eventually you start wanting things like some creative stimulation, some intellectual stimulation, some challenges. You want to feel like you're actually growing instead of just getting worse and worse in your skills because you're not really doing anything productive. And so you get into kind of this whole mental health thing where to actually be mentally healthy, you actually want to do some sort of productive work. And so people start doing that. And then they learn, oh, it's actually pretty easy to turn this into money if I need it. Like if you love carpentry, then you're going to be doing that anyway. Well, it doesn't take a lot to sell some of your things, once your garage is full of things that you've built. And so, all of a sudden you've actually got a source of income again. So in my case, that kind of came to be with the podcast, but others, some people do carpentry, some do like my wife works at her church part-time, for example. So it's, it's nonprofit, it's not a lot of money, but it's not about the money really. It's just more about, her wanting to be in that community. So it's a very interesting thing that can be a little, I think maybe deceptive, because the reality is that people do end up working, but it's now on your terms and it's less hours and you get that life balance instead of the 2-hour commute.
Right. And let's not forget the social contact that you get through work.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're at home all the time with a spouse, you keep busy, but unless you have some other kind of work to do, you probably won't meet new people. And that's hard when you're just, continually circulating with the same people. So I'm glad you're doing that. So what made you decide to do a podcast? Because back about 10 years ago when you started, there weren't that many, especially on the area of financial freedom or just, how to invest. Were there many Canadian podcasts around? Can you even remember who was still around then?
Yeah. There were not that many. I was definitely one of the first ones. I remember Tom Drake from Maple Money. He was there.
Oh, yes.
Dan from Canadian Couch Potato, he had a podcast at the time. Pre Banerjee had his as well. So yeah, it seems like I'm one of the last few remaining active ones. But new ones have come up as well. But to answer your question, what got me started in this whole podcasting world was, pretty early on, we paid off our mortgage. And so once we hit that milestone, I thought, okay, well, that's great that we don't have that debt anymore, but we really need to put some fuel on the fire when it comes to our investments. I mean, we're going to be investing a lot now. Our mortgage just paid off. How do I do it properly? And then if you go down that rabbit hole, as you know, you quickly learn that there's so much conflict of interest in the industry here in Canada. And there's so much, different commissions and people telling you what you should invest in, but are they telling you that because that's right for you or because they get a big commission check at the end? So I've learned about that. And so I thought, okay, I have trust issues. So clearly this is not helping. So let's interview lots of different people, the best people that I can find. Let's learn these best practices. Let's get people that aren't selling these products ideally, like fee-for-service financial planners are some of my favorite guests to have, where, they have no horse in the race. They want you to do well. They're not telling you, oh, you should get whole life insurance. And oh, what a coincidence. They sell life insurance. You know what I mean? Whole life insurance, right? So by learning these best practices from these different people, I was able to kind of decipher, okay, for people that don't actually have anything to sell you, but actually are knowledgeable and know what they're talking about, what are some good best practices to follow? So obviously index investing came out of that. ETF, doing that through ETFs came out of that as well. Now we've got asset allocation ETFs, so now it's even easier. But that was kind of the gist of it, is I was just doing it to learn, to apply to my own scenario. And I figured even if the podcast fails, hey, at least I would have learned things that I'm going to apply myself anyway. So it's not really a lose situation, right? But the podcast ended up doing well. Turns out a lot of people want to know this information just like I did. And so the podcast kept growing and growing. And then eventually, we hit our 5 milestone, like I said, when I was 32. But then at that point, there's always, like I said, there's always things changing. There's always more to learn. Then you get into more complex things like, okay, now that you've accumulated this money, how do you now live off your portfolio? Because that's a whole nother ballgame that's actually even more complicated than the accumulation phase. Because, there's the tax implications, and do you pull it out of your RSP or your TFSA? If you have a taxable account, maybe you have a corporation. So it's this whole thing, right? And new things come into play. Like I can't even remember. The TFSA might not even existed when I first started investing. Like out of university,
that was 2009. Right?
Yeah. So there's things like that, right? I graduated, I believe it was 2007. Yeah. So I mean, there's things like that come into play where you want to learn about these new tools, these new best practices, these things that can actually help you. And it's always nice to learn from others as well. And new people are becoming financially independent all the time. So it's nice to pick their brains because no one person knows everything. And so it's nice to learn how others did it. And then you can kind of apply their lessons to your own life, whether you're FI or not. It doesn't, there's things to learn no matter what.
Well, we had a little bit of a chat beforehand deciding what we were going to talk about. And you said you found something surprising happen when you got into your financial independence years, that you had quite a lot of money anxiety and you hadn't anticipated that.
Yeah, it was so weird. Logically, it doesn't make sense because we hit our FI number and then fast forward quite a few years and the portfolio has been growing. Fortunately, we haven't had like another 2008 scenario. We had the COVID crash, but things recovered quite nicely. And now as we're recording this, we're pretty much at all-time highs, or we had a couple of days where things went down. But, but bottom line is, the portfolio was growing and growing. And I was still feeling anxious about money and are we overspending? And I've read all the things, pretty much everything I could get my hands on in terms of like about 4% rule and withdrawal rates and all of that, and interviewing different people that are experts on this subject. And I was still getting this money anxiety, and the portfolio was growing. So we're actually wealthier than we are when we first started. And I'm still getting anxiety, right? So that doesn't make sense. And so that this light bulb moment came forth where I'm thinking, okay, clearly just more money is not the answer for reducing money anxiety. Obviously, that can be a source of anxiety if you don't have enough and you don't have to pay your bills and creditors are calling. Obviously, that is going to be an anxiety driver. But what was interesting was that I think a lot of people thought this way, and I guess maybe I did too, was that just because you have more doesn't mean that all the money anxiety goes away. There's other things that can play into that. And so what I found out for ourselves is that, once we had our FI number, we kind of got a bit loose on, or not tracking as closely in terms of our expenditures and what are our discretionary expenses, what are our non-discretionary expenses. Like, we knew roughly, I knew we weren't overdrawing on our portfolio, but every single month when the credit card statements came in, I didn't know exactly, or couldn't really tell you roughly like what they're going to be because we weren't tracking that closely enough. And so what I found, and I don't know if this is for everyone, but I know for me, and I know other people are like this too, where if you have this big unknown thing, your brain just can jump to the most negative worst case scenario right away, right? Like unknown equals worst case scenario, which in reality is typically not the case, but for some people's brains, how they work, like mine, that actually happens. And so I'm getting anxious about this money thing, even though, our income statement, our balance sheet and all that is actually showing like, hey, you're doing fine. What are you stressing about? I'm speaking to my financial planner friends and they're like, are you serious? Why are you stressed about this? Right. And so this was an interesting aha moment for myself, because I think when it comes to things like budgeting, cash flow management, I think a lot of times people think, oh, well, that's very helpful when you're just getting started. Let's say you're out of school, your first job, or you're in debt, you're trying to get out. That's when those tools are very critical. And it's true, they are, and that's very helpful. But I find I think it's much healthier to view them as a lifelong thing that you're going to be doing pretty much for the rest of your life, where you do want to know where your money is going. You do want to know how much do I actually need to live on every month versus how much of that money that I'm currently spending is discretionary. Because once you have those numbers, you can actually start forecasting to reasonable accuracy what you actually need. And so that can help you a lot, basically in any stage of life, and especially in your retirement years, because then you can actually anticipate how much money do I have to take out from my investments? Is that a sustainable amount? Can I do that long term? And you don't get into these silly scenarios like me where I'm stressed for no reason. And in my case, I was actually over saving, even though we didn't need to, because I'm scared, right, that we're going to run out, that we're over withdrawing. So I think that was a really big aha moment for myself, where to view this as a life skill. And so there's different softwares that you can use to like track your spending. A lot of people I speak to, they do it even manually. That's fine, but you do want that piece of information. And I've noticed too, when you work with a financial planner, like I've worked with several, they are going to ask you, well, how much are you actually spending? And if you look at them with like a deer in headlights look, then that's probably a signal that, okay, you should probably kind of know, right, what your spending is. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. But yeah, it's been very, very critical in my case. And now the anxiety's finally gone.
Yeah. But it must make you anxious too, because you've got two small children. And as they grow up, they do get more expensive. They have more programs they want to take. They might have to go to private school at some point if they're not doing well in the public school system, or get tutoring, or they want, a bicycle, a very fancy bicycle. So a lot of that is hard to anticipate when they're young, because you haven't seen the older version of themselves and you don't know what kind of peer influence they're going to have to make them want to spend. But it's good to get them into the habit too of living on a budget. And if there's, say, a book that they want to buy, a new kids book, you take them to the library and they might put a hold on it, and eventually they can get it without spending. And so they get a message from that.
That's true. Yeah, there's always more to learn there. And you're totally right. I think having two young kids, and then my wife just recently started actually getting paid for the job that she used to just volunteer for. So for years, like many years, it was just me responsible for all of it. And I think that added to the anxiety as well, where it's like, okay, you're supporting a wife, you're supporting two children, you don't want to go and work in a cubicle again. It's all on you, Cornell. And so you know what I mean? And so when those unknown things came into play, like, hey, how much are we actually spending? What are we going to spend this year on non-discretionary items? Not knowing that. And I think I'm actually an anxious person as well. So it doesn't help. So I hear you. I think it's if you're the breadwinner and it's all on you, it does add to that. But fortunately, there's ways around it. And it's just interesting how much this sort of the unknown can quickly become, you start thinking worst case scenarios right away, even though that's not realistic. And now a quick intermission to tell you about an additional free resource that you may find helpful. On this podcast, we often cover best practices that can not only help you now, but will also be relevant throughout your investment lifetime. But what if you also want an update on what is happening with your investments, the markets, and the economy right now? So to help me stay up to date on these topics, a great Canadian podcast that I listen to weekly is called Views from the Desk. They provide timely information for us Canadians on what is happening to our investments right now, as well as other key factors affecting us, like changes to our interest rates, our inflation, and regulatory changes that we should know about here in Canada. The podcast is hosted by BMO ETFs. I'm a huge fan of theirs. I own a lot of BMO ETFs myself, and it's a great resource for both new and existing ETF investors. I hope you check them out. All episodes are available for free in your favorite podcast player. Just search for Views from the Desk.
You live in Kitchener-Waterloo?
I do.
Yeah. So probably it might have been a little easier for you to buy a house where you could pay off the mortgage quickly there. Right.
Yes. We're not in Toronto, thank goodness.
Yeah. And probably you can save money there on, maybe certain kinds of food where they grow it nearby and you can get it straight from the farm. So it's a nice area. Have you ever lived in Toronto?
We used to live in Brampton. First job out of university. We bought a house in Brampton, and then I would commute to Mississauga, and my wife worked in Brampton. So we did do that, but we only lasted a year. Eventually, we decided we do like Kitchener-Waterloo because our family is here as well, and so that played a big role. Like our friends, our family were here. We liked it. We liked it more there. And like you said, it is a lot less expensive. We definitely got a lot more bang for our buck in terms of money. But I mean, the prices have gone up. It seems in most places by quite a bit. So it's not as affordable as it once was when we were first looking for a house. Yeah.
Right. Do you have any kind of a support group of other people who've taken financial independence, retire early as you did, and just need some moral support or just to chat?
I do, yeah. So there are different like bloggers that have hit it, and different people that I've interviewed in the past that have hit it. So that's always fun. And it's really nice to be able to reach out to these people, because a lot of times they have like a blog or something. And so then we can talk about that and then learn from each other. So there is sort of that, I guess, digital community, you could say, because some are in the US, some are here in Canada. But then also locally, I'm in there's a FI group in Kitchener as well. So so that's been really nice. I've been really enjoying that. So we get together once a month typically, and then we talk about, about things. And it's fun to be able to, for when people are transparent about money and these best practices, where it's not some taboo subject, and where you don't have to worry that, someone's going to compare themselves, and it's really nice. So yeah, I definitely think it's a good influence on me, and it's very fun, and it's nice to be with other like-minded people that try to, with a whole bunch of other optimizers that really try to optimize things on that level. So yeah,
there's a big Canadian hero who lives in the US, so people don't always know he's Canadian, in that FIRE movement, and his name is Mr. Money Musta.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Have you ever met him or been at a conference where he's speaking?
No, I haven't, but he was the first one to ever introduce me to the 4% rule. So I've never spoken with him myself, but yeah, it'll be fun to have him on the show one day. Hopefully, as a Canadian, he'd be willing to get interviewed by a fellow Canuck. But yeah, I remember the first time I somehow stumbled upon his blog. And this was when the 4% rule wasn't as common of a thing that you hear about. And he was the first one I've ever heard write about it. And it just blew my mind. Like, what do you mean you can retire before 65? That wasn't even in the realm of possibilities. Just that, just growing up, you never really heard about that. So it's really nice to have someone like that who's really helped push the envelope on the FIRE movement and that kind of thing. Yeah.
I know if you look it up, say at Wikipedia or something like that, or Investopedia, you'll find out the 4% rule, but perhaps you can explain it for those who haven't really heard about it before.
Sure. Yeah. So there's quite a bit to it, but in a nutshell, and there's a lot of resources written on it, but in a nutshell, it essentially says that you can withdraw 4% of your portfolio adjusted for inflation per year. And the probability of you running out of money if you do that, so you're living off your portfolio when you're doing that every single year, it's extremely low that you will actually run out of money. And so this can be very helpful, because one of the most common questions people ask is, well, how much do I actually need to retire? And so if you know roughly, again, going back to, if you know roughly what you're spending, what your discretionary is versus non-discretionary, and you know that, and you can forecast, okay, if I'm not working anymore, maybe we go down to one car, maybe we move to a less expensive city, because maybe now we live in Toronto, but when we're not working anymore, we don't have to live in an expensive city anymore. So, you can start running some numbers and say, okay, how much do we actually need to retire? So it helps answer that in a relatively quick fashion. Now, once you get close to that, my advice is always, you really should meet with a fee-for-service financial planner. So someone that is not trying to sell you investments, that doesn't sell investments. They can actually run the numbers for you with a financial planning software that they're trained in using. And then you can actually come up with a very good tactical plan, how to get there quicker, how to actually withdraw from your portfolio as time moves on. But as a general first stepping stone, like, if you're in your 20s or let's say early 30s, and you kind of are just getting new to this thing and you want a goal that you're pushing towards, the 4% rule is a relatively good one to use. It was based on some pretty basically like worst case scenarios type of thing. Like, it actually includes the Great Depression in its data set. And so there's actually a very high probability that if you do follow the 4% rule, that you might actually end up with quite a bit of money once all is said and done. You're not actually going to have a portfolio of zero by the time you die. So that's why it's typically used as a nice, relatively conservative measure to find out how much you need to retire. And it is pretty useful. And I've asked many financial planners and FI people about it. What do they like it? There's obviously criticisms of it as well. It's got its pros and cons like everything else. But for the vast majority of people that I've interviewed, they would deem it as a relatively reliable source with some caveats that you can use. But again, once you get close, like if you're just starting off investing, it's a very good one to use. Once you're getting really close to that FI number, maybe you're a few $100,000 off. Okay, maybe you should actually get like a really good financial plan to start optimizing things, because you may actually be able to retire years earlier because maybe you don't need to be as conservative. Like, especially when I was mentioning earlier how the overwhelming majority of early retirees, pretty much everyone I've met at this point, still ends up producing some sort of income through their passion project, through their hobby, right? So the 4% rule assumes you're not making any money, that you're fully retired, no extra income, you're fully living off your portfolio. But again, that's not necessarily the reality, right? So if you're saying, hey, maybe I'm going to make $10,000 a year my partner's going to make another 10,000. Okay, so now we're 20,000 just doing our side thing. Well, all of a sudden, 4% it might actually be too conservative for you, right? Depending on when you're retiring. So it's definitely, I would say, a very good rabbit hole to go down instead of just kind of being overwhelmed by all this and seeing some news stories like, oh, you need 2 million to retire or you're in trouble, right? And then you start thinking, well, some people are like, what's the point? How am I ever going to get there? It can be a little disheartening, right? Whereas I know when I first heard about it through Mr. Money Mustache, it was like, oh, this is actually attainable. It's something that people can actually do. Obviously, it comes with some sacrifices and some smart ways to do things, but it is something that is attainable and not just some pie in the sky thing that only like 1% of people can achieve.
Right. So how do you manage your portfolio? Is it all through ETFs and balanced products, no individual stocks?
Yeah. So right now I'm just pure index, like total market index ETF investor. So that's all that I do. So I don't speculate at all, just broad market index investing all the way. Because of the size of our portfolio, I do buy the underlying ETFs. So I guess to start off at a high level, what a lot of people I strongly recommend they consider is doing something like an asset allocation ETF, particularly when the portfolio is maybe only a few $100,000, because it's very efficient. It's still very low cost. It's got to auto rebalance for you. It's going to get you started. It's a very, very effective tool to use. Once your portfolio gets larger, then for some people like myself, what we choose to do is instead of buying that one ETF, we'll buy the underlying ETFs. So the ETFs that asset allocation ETF consists of, and then you put them strategically into different accounts, like because some are taxed differently in the TFSA versus the RSP versus taxable accounts. If you have a corporation that gets taxed, there's a whole bunch of tax rules around that. And so you can kind of start manipulating things a little bit where they're in the most tax efficient bucket. You don't have to go that route, but if you're like myself, where you're an optimizer and you want to eke every little bit of out, then you start doing that. So that's what I do personally. But then for things like the RESP, which is like its own independent thing because it's for our children's education, there I just use an asset allocation ETF. So I currently buy ZEQT, which is the all equity BMO ETF. So I just top that up every year, max it out so that the kids get the maximum grant. I track to make sure that, I don't want to over contribute either, because eventually we will hit that the max grant number, and then I'm done. So for that particular tool, asset allocation ETFs all the way. For our retirement savings that I'm living off of, that I do actually individual ETFs strategically, depending on where it is most tax efficient. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole that's like a whole other episode all on its own. It gets complicated.
But it is, I think, a time saver just to use ETFs.
Oh, for sure.
Because there are a number of ETF products that cover the same index. So there's really no difference. You can read, there's maybe a little bit of difference in the MER, the management expense ratio, but they usually are set up to hold the same stuff. There are some that are more speculative, or they might have covered calls, or they might be able to leverage what you're buying or selling short. But in general, if you could spend less time on your portfolio, then that's a great efficiency that you have too. It's a time efficiency. And maybe you have a little bit more courage and staying power when the market goes down to not sell, but just sit through it.
Definitely, yeah, because you're not second guessing your stock pick, let's say, right? Like with index investing, we've seen the history. We know how things are roughly likely to happen. And so I'm extremely confident that I made the right decision. Whereas if I started picking, let's say, individual stocks, and I mean, to each his own, I'm not criticizing those that want to have an active part of their portfolio, but I know for myself, if I was picking individual stocks or trying to tilt the portfolio a certain way based on where I think things are going, when things inevitably do go down, because there's always going to be some fluctuations, even if I made the right choice, sometimes things are going to go down regardless, even if it's just temporary. But then when they're at that bottom, I'm going to wonder, well, did I make the right choice? I don't know. And now I'm second guessing myself. And so what I have found to be a good return on time invested for myself to get the most out of my time use is, instead of focusing on that speculation piece, to instead focus on things that are much more sure things. And so to give you an example of that would be things like, okay, are my taxes actually optimized? Am I holding the right things in the right accounts? Am I maximizing the government grants that I'm eligible for? Like I have children, so we get a Canada Child Benefit. If I was older, I'd be looking at optimizing CPP, OAS, make sure I'm not getting clawbacks, things of that nature. So that to me is a much more it's actually in a way guaranteed, right? Because if you figure out a way to optimize that certain piece, you know you're going to get that tax break this coming year. You know for a fact you're going to get that government benefit to this amount because it's all a formula, it's a calculation, it's very concrete. As opposed to if I instead invested that time trying to find the next Amazon, well, I may get it or I may not. I found that has been a very good use of time instead. So basically, solving that investing puzzle by just going total market index investing. And then the time that I would have spent speculating instead, put that in towards tax optimization, tax credits, maximizing government benefits. And hey, if you have a side business, maybe your time is actually better spent there because you can actually make some money there, or growing your career so you can get that promotion so you can make more money. So personally, I found that to be a much more effective way. And a lot of the people that I've interviewed have pretty much said something similar as well.
Yeah. Do you have a side business?
Just the podcast at this point. That's it. Yeah. So I had like others back in the day. I used to have a rock climbing training one, which again was great because I had that while I was working full time. So it was generating some extra money. So that would help us with our discretionary expenses so that our non-discretionary would be covered by, so we could invest a lot more basically into indexes. And I used Canadian Financial Summit, which I owned and co-ran for 3 years. So I've had that. But these days I've kind of started to wind down, trying to spend even more time with the kids, focusing on health. And so it's just the podcast at this point, and I don't see myself really stopping it. I'll be surprised if I ever stop it because, like I said, there's always more to learn from others, and it's enjoyable.
And you put out this podcast more or less yourself, except for a few things like the editing.
Yeah. So I have an editor now that I use. I have a co-op student right now as well that's helping out. But for the most part, it's a very, very small team. I have the accountant for the most part, like day in, day out throughout the year. It's pretty much the editor and myself currently, because obviously co-op is just a temporary thing. Yeah, so it's just us. And yeah, she does a wonderful job. And yeah, I've been really happy with it. And the podcast seems to keep growing. So, like very happy about hitting finally the 2 million download mark this year. And it's been great. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Cornell, we were talking about lessons you've learned on your journey through financial independence at an early age, and also doing a podcast where you're interviewing guests who are usually skilled in money management and probably know more than you do, transmitting their wisdom through you. What kind of lessons have you learned other than, as you explained earlier, the importance of cash flow management? Because without that, you'll never have a real confidence that you're well equipped for anything that might befall you and your family. And I imagine part of that is putting emergency fund together too, and making sure not to dip into it in an arbitrary way.
For sure. Yeah. So one of the big takeaways was the index investing piece. I mean, that's been unanimous for the most part. The vast majority of the experts that I've interviewed, those that have achieved FI, they pretty much all either do index investing themselves and typically recommend it as well. So instead of focusing on cryptocurrency, or when we had that whole GameStop situation, or pot stocks years ago when there was that big surge in them as well, instead of focusing energy on that and going for that get rich quick piece, the vast majority of the experts, they definitely just say, look, just do the total market index approach. You can do that through ETFs very affordably. And that's one of the best ways to kind of get to that FI point as quickly as possible. The other big element was the importance of having optionality. And so this is more so once you've hit financial independence, but even when you're planning for it as well. So a big thing was that there is no guarantees, really. There are just too many uncertainties, different things that could happen. Yes, you could do something like put all your money in GICs, but then even that isn't really, you're going to get that guaranteed return, but then there's no guarantees on the other end where, okay, what if that gets eroded too heavily by inflation and you don't have enough growth in your portfolio to sustain you? So there really
and liquidity is a big thing with GICs.
Exactly, and liquidity, right? So there is always pros and cons. And so it's very important. So there really isn't this one golden bulletproof solution that has all positives and no disadvantages. And so that's just something that I feel as an investor, you have to accept. And so one way that I personally found to be able to navigate that or not get all stressed out by that kind of a thing is to just having this optionality, having different options, having different levers that you can pull if needed. So one of the ones I've already touched on a little bit before was on keeping your skills sharp. So like I said, most retirees, especially early retirees, they still do end up doing some sort of productive work because the whole sitting on the beach thing does get boring after 6 months. And so if there are certain skills that you want to develop, that you enjoy developing, that you do want to learn, because again, it gives you that intellectual stimulation, it gives you that creative outlet, things of that nature, that is a really very valuable lever to pull, because one, it will make you happier, it'll make you more fulfilled, but also it will make you more stable when it comes to your finances, because you know that if things got really bad, we had another 2008 scenario, something like a 40% crash in equities temporarily, that, okay, maybe you just take on some extra work, but it's work that you enjoy doing anyway. And so I think that is one of the best levers to pull, because realistically, you're going to be doing it anyway. And so, to not assume that you will be bringing in $0 for the rest of your life once you retire, particularly if you're an early retiree. There's also the option of moving to a lower cost area. We already talked about that a little bit. That can have a very substantial impact. Ellen, you mentioned the security sort of blanket, right? The emergency fund, having some money set aside that you can use for things like that, so that you are not forced to sell at the very bottom. That's been a very nice lever, a very anxiety relieving lever that I've used myself as well. I try not to have too much in there, because there's obviously opportunity cost, because that could be invested in equities that has a higher long-term expected return. But again, it's very hard to be 100% equities and, and ride that all the way through, even though some of the math can say you actually should, and there's arguments on that. But yeah, I do feel there is that like mental, there's that sanity piece that you want as well. You know what I mean? Since we're not robots, you want that component as well. And now a quick message from one of our sponsors. There are so many opinions on how to invest your money today, but it can be hard to find credible voices to rely on in the world of finance and investing. One resource I turn to every week is the ETF Market Insights YouTube channel, led by today's episode sponsor, BMO ETFs. Market Insights brings in industry experts, and their weekly episodes cover the hottest themes like inflation, infrastructure, healthcare, and more. Tuning in helps me stay up to date on what's happening so I can be a smarter investor, and you can also submit your own ETF questions to be answered on the show. So do yourself a favor and subscribe on YouTube to ETF Market Insights, or visit etfmarketinsights.com so you can be notified when future episodes go live.
Were you ever bitten by the real estate bug? Buy a house and rent it out and you have some income coming in from your tenants?
We were landlords for a bit, for a few years, but it wasn't like because of some speculation thing or anything like that. My wife she had an opportunity. So we ended up paying off our house, but then my wife had an opportunity to work in Nova Scotia for a little bit as part of our job. And so we didn't have any kids at the time. So we thought, hey, that sounds like fun. We can relocate, we can check on Nova Scotia, we'll rent out our house. And so that's what we did. And then when we came back to Ontario, we ended up buying another house. So that one just became a rental. So I was in that rental game, or whatever you want to call it, for a bit. So we did get to ride that appreciation. Like definitely there was some money made on that side as well. But it got crazy. I mean, people were buying houses with no no clauses for a home inspection, no clauses for financing. Yeah. And when that started happening, I thought, okay, this is making me very uneasy. This can't be sustainable. And so we ended up selling the property. And again, I just put it all into basically into ETFs, into index investing. Now the real estate market kept climbing. So I guess, if I had a crystal ball, I would have compared to see, okay, which one would have actually been better. But at the time, I'm like, okay, things are getting really highly speculative in the real estate industry. Now, maybe there won't be a crash soon, but maybe there will. So let's cash out, put it all into index investing. So yeah, we did play that game for a bit, but I find the index investing piece is a lot less stressful. There's no heaters breaking down in December, where you got to take it, that kind of a thing, right? You just sit back, you can collect the dividends as they come in, sell off as needed. That one seems to be a better fit for me personally.
Good. Yeah. And I think we have to give the warning that ETFs by themselves are not miracle workers. Yes. They have to be not trendy, not too narrow, not investing in AI, for example, because that's very focused and that's the height of the market right now, most of those companies. So you certainly don't want to buy them now, maybe after they crash, if they will, but try and be fairly boring. That's always the advice. Look for stocks that are really boring, waste management and concrete and whatever. And I have been teaching the same course, Investing for Beginners, at University of Toronto School of Continuing Studies. I started about 2005 and still do it as of today. It's a short course. It was up to about 9 sessions, 2 hours apiece, so 18 hours. Now it's down to 6 and 12 hours. But I find that it can be difficult to teach the person who's never done any investing how to invest because it's quite a complicated area. And there's a lot of jargon. There's a lot of concepts that you have to wrap your head around, like what's an index, for example? How does an index work relative to the stock market as a whole? And what I found is that you can teach them a lot of information, but what you really need to do, and the information is all backed up online now. There's a lot of great sites where you can get great information. So you don't even need to take a course once you understand what the basics are. But it's still the problem that hurts most people is the behavior side of things. How you feel, how nervous are you? How much money are you putting away into your investments? And how does that fit with your risk level? There's a lot of tests that you can do to try and test your risk level, how much risk you can take on. But until it happens to you once or twice, like you were saying, 40% off in a short period when the market didn't look like it was about to topple the way it did in 2008. And we had that great example of Derek Foster, who was another person who got out of the workforce really early. He called himself Canada's youngest retiree, and he was investing. But as we found out later, he was more risky in his investing. He had a lot of individual stocks. And in March 2009, he got in touch with me at the Toronto Star and Jonathan Chevreau at the Financial Post, and maybe Rob Carrick as well, who was at the Globe and Mail, and said to all of them, I've done so much work on this market crash. And from what I can tell from all the work that I'm doing, it's really low and this is a good time to sell. And he was worried because he had children too, and he didn't want to, lose all the money that he'd made. But he actually went to the media for us to tell the audience through him that this was a good time to sell. And as it happened, he just picked the week when the market got to the very lowest it would get after that big 2008 crash and started going up again. So he looked kind of silly. And then he spoke to Jim Daw, who was a investment writer at the Toronto Star. And Jim was talking to him and he said, you're an idiot. You're an idiot millionaire. And Derek laughed and he liked the title and he wrote a book about the idiot millionaire, just talking about the mistakes that he made and how he realized that he shouldn't be trying to time the market. He should just stay in there, and not sell it all. I think he'd sold most of it. And he'd also used some leverage for some of the stocks that he was buying, buying them on borrowed money. So you have to figure out who you are and how you can handle it. And some of the people that I've talked to are very anxious to invest, and they'll come back to me several times and they'll say, do you have a good financial advisor you could send me to? So there was one woman, I took her to 2 or 3 different places. She liked them at first, but then she said afterward that after she started investing with them, her stocks had gone down. And on paper, she wasn't selling, but she just felt that it was so wrenching for her to see even the paper losses that she didn't want that kind of account. And I think for people like that, you probably have to put maybe 80 or 85% of your money into something that hardly fluctuates at all and just take a little bit of it and put it into the market. So you have to know about that. And you also have to know how to measure your progress and how to see how you're progressing relative to others. And also, who do you trust? Who can you read? Who can you agree with? Realize that there's so many quacks out there on TV and radio, and especially in the US, they've got a few who are quite controversial, and that they're trying to push you into areas that are too risky for you. And especially all this Bitcoin stuff and crypto. The Ontario government has a site called Get Smarter About Money, which is a great place to go and learn about.
Yep.
Yeah. But then they started one called Get Smarter About Crypto, which was even a couple levels lower in terms of making it accessible to everyone with very graphic information and hardly any jargon, algebra, or anything like that. So it takes, I guess, motivation once you've finished the class. And one of the things that I find is really helpful is what we're doing right now, listening to podcasts or going to discussion forums or signing up for a service where there's a lot of people giving you advice and you can ask questions. 5i Research, which you mentioned, you work there, and 5i Research is the owner of the Canadian MoneySaver they do a lot of that with their clients. They try and help them get a fully diversified portfolio. They do a portfolio analysis and help you get out of what you're in and get more diversified. And also they've got a big library of questions and answers where you can refer to it all the time and they get updated all the time. So I do think that life is good for you. If you're a do-it-yourself investor, you do not need a financial advisor, especially one who has conflicts of interest, who is trying to sell you high fee mutual funds as opposed to low fee index products. But you do have to be more diligent in terms of finding the right resources online and making sure that you don't let yourself get carried away with your emotions or with your friends and relatives giving you their advice about what's going on in the stock market. You know, this whole fear of missing out that happens to a lot of people when they're reading or talking to friends. So you have to just have good instincts about what you should buy and have a process where instead of just acting quickly on impulse, when you get to a point where you're feeling that something needs to be done, you kind of put in like a yes and no in terms of the things that you want to do, the pros and cons, and then write it all down so that later on, when you're looking back, you say, why did I do that? And at least you have something to refer to. So that's a long speech about me. But what do you think your future will be? If you're just turning 40, do you think the next 30 or 25 years will be just like these?
Well, I have growing kids, right? So I think things will continue to evolve as the kids get older. But I think now it's a pretty good sweet spot. It was interesting because, you know, when we hit the retirement piece, I tried the full retirement and realized that's not like not doing any productive work at all is not really fulfilling or intellectually stimulating. So I learned that's not the answer. But then after that, I took on the summit, which was kind of the opposite of that, where now I'm taking on way more than I need to. And now it's actually taking me away from the kids, right? So now I think we're finally, just through some, I guess, trial and error and trying the extremes on both sides, I think we're finally at a sweet spot. So I definitely intend to keep the Build Wealth Canada podcast going. I don't see it stopping. I think there's always going to be interesting individuals, interesting experts to talk to like yourself. We continuously can learn from each other. We have different life experiences. I think it makes us all stronger as a whole. And I love Canada. It's nice to be able to take these things that apply specifically to Canadians as well and talk about them and learn these sort of different tactics and best practices. So yeah, so I think podcast is going to keep going, going to focus on being a good dad and staying healthy as well, because all of this financial stuff I've learned is, I mean, it's kind of almost for naught if you end up being unhealthy and you end up dying prematurely anyway, because you didn't focus enough on your health. Obviously, sometimes things are not preventable and you just got unlucky, but a lot of things can at least kind of weigh the odds in your favor on the health side. So I'm trying to kind of weigh the dice where I stay as healthy as possible and spend time with the kids. And then, hopefully, the whole fulfillment piece, I think a big thing is helping other Canadians. But like I like to weigh the odds in my favor by trying to stay as healthy as possible. So I think those are two noble pursuits. And then the third one being the podcast, where I get to learn and apply to my own life by interviewing other experts, but then also sharing what I've learned, what's worked for me, what hasn't, same with others, so that we can all grow together as a community here in Canada and help each other out. So yeah, I think it's a win-win across the board, and it's fulfilling and enjoyable. And yeah, I don't see myself stopping anytime soon.
Great. Well, we interviewed you back at the beginning of our podcast, and
yes.
So 5 years have just gone since then, and glad to see you're still doing it and you still plan to do it. And I think in general, Canadians don't have the greatest financial literacy, but what we are finding is that they get really angry when they see big companies not treating them well. The grocery stores are really seen as profiteering, not being really in line with what customers want. There's a lot of anger with the airlines too, with the fact that the government went to great lengths to bring in an air passenger rights law, and it's not being observed. And the government's complaint mediator, the Canadian Transportation Agency, can't keep up. They've got a backlog of a year and a half worth of complaints. So a lot of it is up to us putting the pressure on and getting, at least you have seen that some of the grocery stores have backed down on what they were doing because of the outrage they were hearing from the customer. So there's still a role for us to be financially literate and also to try and get across our views, because the government, though it tries to help out, sometimes isn't quite on the right wavelength or just doesn't have enough enforcement of its laws that it's already passed.
And thank you for being such a big, prominent leader in that field.
Oh,
and
thank you.
taking care of the consumers. You've been doing it for so many years, and a lot of people have many kind things to say about you for all the work you've done. So thank you as well.
Okay. And thank you, Cornell, for being a guest. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, Ellen. Bye.
Okay, great. Bye.
All right. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please share it with someone that you think may find it useful. And of course, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify is always super appreciated as well. I'd like to end with a big thanks to one of our sponsors who, apart from my investing course, literally keeps the entire Build Wealth Canada podcast and website free for you. Do you know why asset allocation ETFs have become so popular? Asset allocation explains over 90% of the variation in a portfolio's quarterly return. So it's no wonder Canadian investors are turning to these ETFs. Today's sponsor, BMO ETFs, offers these innovative all-in-one solutions with the BMO All Equity ETF, ZEQT, the BMO Growth ETF, ZGRO, the BMO Balanced ETF, ZBAL, and the BMO Conservative ETF, ZCON, and many more. BMO developed these to help provide investors with ETFs that offer broad diversification and are also low cost and simple to use. These ETFs invest in a number of underlying index-based ETFs and are rebalanced automatically back to your set asset allocation or mix of stocks and bonds. They offer a hands-free approach to investing that is built on disciplined weights to provide exposure to different geographies and sectors all in one solution. BMO actually offers 8 asset allocation ETFs, and you can learn more at bmoetfs.com.
Thanks for listening to the Build Wealth Canada podcast at www.buildwealthcanada.ca.